Films Online. Talking Films Online, or TFO in short, is an informal coming together of teachers, students, researchers, filmmakers, and cinephiles interested in cinema. More importantly, those interested in talking and writing about cinema. The online group came together quite spontaneously during the pandemic and lockdown in June 2020, while Dr. Geeta Vishwanath from Baroda and I have been coordinating the activities of TFO since its inception. It would not have been possible without the enthusiasm of people who regularly join the discussion, like Ajanta Sarkar, Tarakeshwar VB, Yagnashri, Sridhar Modugu, Paniraj, Rajan Barrett, Nandini Manjrekar, Madhurima, Rasha, etc. So far, we have organized over 175 online events, which include weekly discussions on a pre-decided film, besides a few month-long film festivals and discussions, such as a short film festival curated by Dr. Nipa Majumdar, a French film festival curated by Abhijit Ranade, sorry about that. An Iranian film festival curated by Dr. Praveena Cooper, Women's Film Festival curated by Soundarya Jain, an Adur Fest that was curated by VK Cherian, and recently we had a Green January 2024 where we discussed films on farmers. Some more such curated fests are in the offing this year. We have had as many as 175 discussons, including film scholars such as Madhav Prasad, Theodore Bhaskaran, Babu Subramanian, film critics like Saibal Chatterjee and Tanul Thakur, writers such as Amandeep Sandhu, Bhashwati Ghosh, scholars in different disciplines such as Devparna Roy, V. Krishnappa, and today's discussant, Dr. Srinivas Lankala, has also come on TFO earlier this year. Filmmakers, as it has happened today, often make their films available exclusively for TFO members to watch by generously sharing links to their films, and they have often joined in the discussion. We have had directors like Jayan Cherian, Girish Kasarvalli, Adur Gopal Krishnan, Aparna Sen, Anjali Montero and KP Jaishankar, Karan Bali, Amul Palekar, Uma Magal, and many others. Akshay Indikar and documentary filmmaker Kesri Haru, who had also joined the discussion. P. Sainath too joined the discussion when we discussed a documentary in which he features. The TFO WordPress blog is also alive. We have had people send us their film reviews and articles, and we have been posting it on the blog, including translated articles. We have just announced the 4th smartphone short film contest for students to mark the TFO anniversary in June this year. We request you to share the contest poster with your students if you haven't done that already. Our WhatsApp group and Facebook group is a forum to share film-related information, and we've had members sharing interesting articles, etc. on it, besides, of course, the information that Geeta and I post about TFO events. Today, as we all know, we will be discussing Yamini Krishna's documentary film, Ilm Ka Shehar. Yamini Krishna works on film history, urban history, and Deccan history. She received her PhD from the English and Foreign Languages University, Hyderabad in 2020, a very valuable and much cited member to all the students, the current students, someone whom we are all very proud of. She has been the recipient of India Foundation for the Arts grant in 2023, the Asia Art Archive Shergil Sundaram Foundation archival grant in 2022, Satyajit Ray Film and Television Institute Independent Research Grant in 2022. Philip M. Taylor Award for Best Article by a New Researcher in Media History in 2021. She has an ICSSR major project just last year, and a Charles Wallace India Trust Fellowship in 2017. Her work has been published in various journals, very popular and well-known journals to students of South Asian and Indian history and cinema. Her co-edited volume titled Claims on the City, Situated Narratives of the Urban is published by Lexington Books in October 2023. She currently teaches in Flame University here in Pune. Her film project that we have just familiarized ourselves with first started as a project of archival presentation and took new directions as a film. When Yamini and I were discussing whom we could invite as a discussant, the first name that came to our mind is Dr. Srinivas Lankala. Very warm welcome, Dr. Srinivas Lankala, again to TFO. And thank you for agreeing to be a discussant for today's film. Dr. Srinivas Lankala will initiate discussion on this film. He's an assistant professor in the Department of Communication at EFL University, Hyderabad. He teaches courses in media studies and audiovisual production. His research interests lie in the area of semiotics and the philosophy of communication. So thank you all for joining today. Special thanks to Yamini and to Dr. Srinivas for joining today. And it's now over to you, Dr. Srinivas.
Okay. Good evening, and thank you, Dr. Nikhila, and thank you, Yamini, for making the film in the first place. So I probably won't take 30 minutes to talk because for two reasons. One is this is a difficult film for me to talk about because it's very close to home, close to my heart in terms of the subject matter and what it deals with. So I'll try to talk a little bit about the form of the film itself, and then some more about what the subject that it's dealing with and how it does that. But I also wanted to hear more from Dr. Yamini herself about the process it took, because it was very interesting to see that it started out as something else, started out as an archival project turned into a film. And so it would be interesting to talk about that. And then maybe we can discuss more about how that process works, how this film came to be, and so on. So the film itself is, like I said, it's something very close to home and heart, literally, because I live in Hyderabad, but also I grew up just a stone's throw from the Idara Adabiyat Urdu that opens the film. So it's a very familiar building and space to me. And I remember it from the time it used to have a much bigger compound, and the roads in the city were much narrower than they are. So it was heartwarming to see a film that dealt with this very unique institution and the people behind it. And it's an institution that is, it is known to many people in the city. It is used by a lot of researchers, scholars, students, and lovers of literature, but hasn't really got the kind of attention or awareness that it should in the general public. So in that sense, starting with that, I thought was a really good opening to the film. Now, the film itself, it's a very unique kind of film, I thought, because it's difficult to define in terms of what kind of documentary it is. It is primarily what we call an expository documentary, in the sense that the filmmaker is trying to tell us something, to inform us about something we don't know, to kind of capture the essence of this idea of the relationship between knowledge and the city, between the presence of literature in the city, the presence of books in the city, and so on, which is a difficult subject in itself to talk about. But it's also much more than just an expository documentary. The fact that I think it opens with a conversation, it opens with a kind of self-reflexive, autobiographical, on that kind of autobiographical note. And there is a sense of a kind of poetic documentary that runs through the film at times. So in a sense, I found it a mixture of these two things. It's also very reflexive in terms of uh, the way that the film is narrated. Because I think also because of the filmmaker's own involvement with the work that the film is talking about. Um, Maybe when we talk about the process of making the film, we can talk a little bit more about this reflexive voice and what that means for the film subject. Um, yeah, the film is also close to home in the sense that it's made by people from FLU. I wanted to acknowledge Srikanth also, who was a student of mine who was involved with the making of the film. Now, in terms of I'll talk about it in terms of the structure of the film and then the subject that it deals with. In terms of structure, it's very interesting to see to start off a film with something like a foreword, to go through to consciously divide the subject of the film into something like chapters where you are dealing with a historical period, then the people, then other subjects that deal with this relationship. So in a way, it is kind of like a filmic book. It is trying, I thought, to it's a way of translating the form that literature takes into a documentary film, which again is difficult to do. So that's it was interesting to see and very commendable that that was done. Um, in terms of what the film contains, like I said, it's talking about this very complex relationship between knowledge and the city, but primarily knowledge in the form of books and literature. Now, to make a film about books is itself very difficult to know, to kind of figure out what is it about literature or about books that can be talked about in a film. How do you capture the essence of what books mean to people? It's a very different medium of knowledge from what a film is, but how do you capture that essence, that the feeling that people have towards literature and books in a documentary without it becoming mainly autobiographical or informative? And so that was interesting to see in the film, simply because what you find is a diverse range of voices of people speaking, because the film is primarily in that sense, other than the reflexive voiceover, it has interviews and in that what we call the talking heads genre of filmmaking. But it is a kind of diversity of views that takes the film away from a mere meditation on literature. It We start off with people associated with the Idara, but then we go on to people who deal with literature, who have encountered this relationship of city and literature in many different ways, in different languages, at different historical periods, in different social contexts. And that move opens up the film to a very diverse population, which reflects not just the variety of ways in which people relate to books. So it is not simply about literature in the sense of what we consider mainstream literature or safeguarding old books in an archive or in a museum, but the kind of living relationship that people have with books every day. And the fact that it goes through a lot of, and the fact that the filmmakers thought about these different kinds of relationships, whether it is buying secondhand books and on the street in Abbots or in the secondhand bookshops, or the students who sit in the libraries to prepare for competitive exams, which is a whole other genre of literature that they are studying, the guides and textbooks, and that kind of academic work is also a very strong, it is one of the strongest relationships that people have with books in the city. The fact that there are so many students who come to the city for various reasons. And so it was important to have included that voice. And I mean, one thing we'll talk about it later, but I thought that could also have been expanded into a whole other chapter in the film by itself, because there's a whole culture of students and books and textbooks that the city has. So for me, what first stood out about the film, other than the form, was this diversity of content. And it comes through in a diversity of languages, the very easy mixture of Urdu, Telugu, and English that we see. which seems very natural because in a way that is how people speak in the city, but also in a way that it communicates what the city is. It has always been cosmopolitan and mixed in terms of language and literature, what we consider literature in the city. And so it's good that the film also takes that kind of approach to interviews, to voiceovers, and the kind of quick crossover from one voice to another, from very different perspectives. It gives the feeling of a dialogue amongst people who have this kind of relationship to books and literature. So it's a film about literature and books, but it's also a film about the city. And so in that sense, it's this kind of multilingual or a diverse approach is the best kind of way in which you can talk about the city. Now, the other interesting aspect of the film is that it is trying to capture, or the opening of the film is at a moment in time, the setting up of the Idara and then other institutions, in the late 19th, early 20th centuries, which was a period of history in Hyderabad, which is again very difficult for us to talk about today, because it is a period in which the language that was used, the idiom that people used to talk about things like literature, books, the kind of modernity or what people thought about the city, about their future, about progress, these were all in a language and idiom that we don't use anymore today. So it's a kind of lost way of speaking or way of thinking about the city, about the state, about the public. That was the context in which all these institutions were set up, the Idara, the other libraries that the film talks about. And so in that sense, it's a very difficult time period to capture. It's a difficult time period for people to explain or tell people about as well. And the subjects in the film, the people that the film interviews, try to do that. And that's what makes the film very different from other films about cities and books and so on, because it is one of the few that is trying to capture this kind of lost moment in time, trying to tell us not just about the contemporary relationship of Hyderabad to literature, but also act as a kind of documentation or a marker of that period, which is, as time goes by, it becomes more and more difficult for people to remember that period, but also to explain what it meant. And in that sense, I think it's a very important, a kind of important moment or an important film in the historical preservation of the city's own memory, the collective memory that people have about the city. But the film doesn't stop there. So it makes that kind of seamless connection between the setting up of the institutions and the libraries to what people do today. And in some senses, it's a kind of chronological film. It's a very simple kind of chronology. It ends with people who are setting up similar things today, people who have this love for books and literature even today. So it kind of comes full circle at the end. It's a very satisfying kind of film that way, where you end with people even today who have this same kind of love for knowledge in the form of books and literature that Dr. Mohiuddin Qadri Zor had at the beginning of that you start with at the beginning of the film. So that way also it's an interesting structure, the circular structure that the film has. I was also I'm personally amazed to see A.A. Hussain being recognized in the film. It's an old bookshop in Abbots in the city where I spent many hours and many years of my life, in fact, because they used to have something very few bookshops had at the time, which was an old mezzanine floor with children's literature. And we sometimes forget about the importance of children's literature and the fact that it is when you're a child that you start loving books and literature, and it's something that stays with you. So it was good to see that the shop acknowledged. It's a shop that has disappeared now. I think a few years ago they had to close. But to see the people behind the store, the shop, and then to see the bookshop being acknowledged, it also is a kind of representative of that aspect of literature, that you need authors, readers, libraries, book clubs, archives, institutions, but also publishers and booksellers. And they're a very important part of the literary life of any city or any culture. And it was good to see that shop being acknowledged. That, I mean, I know the film itself is short and it has constraints of length, but there is also a whole other subject of publishers in Hyderabad. There is a whole tradition of local publishers, local booksellers of different kinds of books, some of which are unique to the city itself, which perhaps maybe a future project can explore or extend. Um, So libraries, booksellers, I thought that transition or that kind of link was also important to do. That leads us to the current state of bookselling in the city, the fact that there are very few bookshops left, and there are courageous people who still set up bookshops and libraries, like some of whom are mentioned in the film. But also the importance given to the second-hand book markets, the footpath markets and Abids, the second-hand bookshops in the city. That was again something that was good to see in the film. In a larger sense, I thought the film, other than its subject about literature, books, and so on, it's as I said, it's an important marker in talking about the city's own history, Hyderabad's own history, not just in the context of Hyderabad city itself, but its place in a larger, broader national culture. The fact that what has now become a very provincial kind of culture was once something much larger, much broader, much more inclusive. It was a kind of national culture in itself. That's what I meant when I said it's an idiom that we have lost. So that's why it's difficult to capture something like that in film. But I think the 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 film does attempt to do that, not just through its content, but through its form and through the people who are interviewed, who provide much of the words in the film. Um, it was good to see Dr. Sara Wahid as well in the film. It's a kind of important link to a diasporic Hyderabad that she provides, which is also an important part of the literary culture of the city. The fact that it is not limited to the city itself today, but has influenced many Hyderabadi diaspora communities in Pakistan, North America, Australia, and so on, which are really strong communities and have very strong links to institutions in the city even today. Now, maybe I'll stop here talking about the content of the film itself. In terms of what I felt when I watched the film, it's it's something that I thought the thing that was most valuable about the film to me was the fact that it had this kind of reflexive voice. The fact that it was, in a way, the filmmaker's voice. It was a documentation of something that is personal. Because, like I said, it's talking about something, about a time period which is otherwise difficult to capture, which cannot really be done in a very straightforward documentary style, and it needs a certain kind of personal interpretation in order for it to make sense to a larger audience. And that's where I thought a reflexive voice that was used, a kind of very personal autobiographical story that starts off the film and runs through the film in these short snippets of the voiceover. That is what holds the film together. So that is what stood out to me. Perhaps we can talk more about how that came to be written and what the idea was behind including those stories. The other thing is, like I said, it felt a lot like a dialogue, simply because there is such a diverse range of voices, languages, and different kinds of people talking about their relationship to books, to the city, what they think of knowledge, what they think of literature, that the film ends up being basically a dialogue between many different people, many different ways of looking at this city knowledge relationship. So I thought it would actually have probably, maybe in a future extension, that it could actually be a dialogue. It could actually be people talking to each other, um, whether it is within an institutional framework, a kind of debate or discussion, or simply capturing the discussions that uh, lovers of literature have, whether it is when they meet up in groups, when they are visiting libraries, students who are, after spending a day in the library, the kind of discussions that most students have. So that dialogue is, I think, a kind of core aspect of the film, and that contributes to that very participatory nature of the film itself. So it comes through because people are constantly talking and expressing, and then the cuts between voiceovers are very well done because they're very clearly linked to each other to provide either a kind of complement to something that we just heard, or to provide a different perspective, to say that yes, there are many different kinds of ways of looking at books. There are uh, different kinds of people who have inhabited the city and who have depended on this relationship to literature and books. And literature means different things to different people. So just making that dialogue itself the form of the film would actually make for it would be a very different kind of film, but I think it actually would increase that sense of understanding what this relationship means, more than a kind of exposition of libraries or institutions. So, because that is the mode of narration in the film that stood out for me more than the information that the film gives about different historical points and different institutions. Um, yeah, in the end, I thought it was also, I mean, it is a kind of poetic film. It has a rhythm of its own. It has the voice that it has is also poetic at times. The way that it looks at the visuals that it has clearly show a kind of the way that the camera lovingly lingers over bookshelves, dusty books, people working with books, people reading. There is a kind of visual poetry in um, the content of the film itself, in addition to the structure. So yeah, I think those are the thoughts I had when I saw the film. Like I said, it's because it's something very close to me, and it's very something I've grown up with. It's difficult to put it in a more structured or formal way. But I'm hoping that maybe if we have a discussion, and then Yamini can also talk about both the coming together of this film, that is how this film started, what was the project earlier, how did it end up being like this, and also talk a little bit more about the thinking behind the voiceover, behind the dialogue that forms much of the film. Um, then that would be illuminating, and maybe we can discuss more after that. So yeah, so thank you. That's all.
Thank you very much, Dr. Srinivas. I think this is precisely what we were expecting, someone knowledgeable about the city, about the subject, as well as someone with an academic approach like you to filmmaking. So thank you so much. At this point, I just also have to welcome members of the Khidki Collective. Sorry, I didn't do it right at the outset. So thanks to everyone who has joined here for this discussion, and look forward to hearing all your responses to Yamini's film. And now the discussion is open. If anyone wants to come in at this point, you're most welcome. Please unmute yourself so that I know that you want to speak.
Can I?
Yes, please go ahead. Please go ahead.
Can I come in, Nikhila?
Yeah. Yes. Geeta, please go ahead.
Thank you, Yamini, so much for the film. I thoroughly enjoyed it. And what was exciting for me was, and I'm sure you know this fact, the library movement in India began in 1910 in Baroda. So I was, I saw the kind of linkage. And then subsequently in 1921, it started in Hyderabad, in Telangana as well. In fact, the whole starting point of the film about libraries was something that excited me at a personal level because of its connection with my adopted city. And clearly it is the film of a bibliophile, and as Srinivas has already very eloquently pointed out, even the camera is, the gaze of the camera is such a loving gaze on the bookshelves. And also, like he has already pointed out, I thought there is another film within this film, and that is about the bookstores. So that could be an independent subject of research in itself, and possibly a kind of a sequel to this film. So, I mean, initially, at least, these are some of the things that I wish to say. Maybe along the way, I could add something more.
Yeah,
Thank you for the
thanks.
film. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Geeta. Yamini, at any point, if you want to come in, just let me know. If you want to respond to anything, if you feel you have to intervene. I think I have to kind of say, this is my narrative of how this film probably came to be. When Yamini began her work on city and cinema, she, of course, she looked at the archives, and it was almost like a fresh look at the archives, looking for material on cinema in Hyderabad, which was really, in some ways, unheard of. But in the course of that research, so what began in the Telangana State Archives took all kinds of, I think, weird routes. And one of the places that and one of the sources she discovered was this large material on cinema in Urdu. And it was in the course of her PhD that she started, getting someone initially to translate material from Urdu. And then I think she started to learn Urdu and also probably Persian. So whenever I'd invite her to TFO discussions, she'd say it clashes with my class time, my online class time. So this language, learning this language, familiarizing herself with this material was very much, I think, part of a research project, which has now, I think, also metamorphosed now that she's away from Hyderabad into a kind of longing, loving look at the city in a different kind of way. And I think one of the senses, this is my response. I briefly messaged Yamini after watching the film about this. So when I watched the film, the first part of the film was absolutely fascinating for me. As Dr. Srinivas said, the many possible histories, which has got simply written over by a particular kind of nationalist history, which determines how Hyderabad should be, or what its place should be. So the film, I felt, was kind of really throwing up open so many different possibilities of the history of the city. There's so many things that it could have become or could have meant, which have been now somehow rudely foreclosed. So to me, that was the most exciting part of the film. The second part of the film, which is more contemporary, I felt there was, I'm not sure, this is a kind of a subjective reaction. I felt that what was creeping in was a certain kind of nostalgia, which is strange. When you're talking about the past in the film, Yamini, I didn't feel it was nostalgic. But when you're talking about books, about their disappearance, about bookstores, it sounded like there was a nostalgia for lost times. There was some kind of, like lingering on reading books rather than, something larger. As a historian, the vision that guided your the first part. So I felt somehow in the second part, particularly when you're talking about the various spaces for reading and all that, I thought, okay, maybe there are two films here, so people are talking about a sequel. I felt that there were there was a tension, and I felt that part gave the entire film a kind of nostalgic air, which I'm sure, I mean, the film is more than just nostalgia. So this was my response, but thanks very much on behalf of TFO and all of us. Thanks very much for making the film and also for allowing us to watch and have this discussion today. Yeah. So anyone who would like to respond, come in now. Yes, Uma. Yeah, so people who have lived with the city have found resonance in your film. Yeah, please go ahead, Uma.
Yes, sure. Thank you so much. And I'm so happy to be here again. And Yamini, thank you for this film. It was great. It was really wonderful to see it on its own. And we'll talk more about that along the lines of what Mr. Lankala has said and, Geeta and Nikhila have said. But I had a personal moment and I've, posted everywhere on social media about it because I was just so delighted. My late father, he passed 25 years ago, and, you seek out photos, you seek out things with siblings and other family, you do all that for when you remember them. But when I was seeing your film, I suddenly saw him on my computer screen. And it was really wonderful. It was so wonderful. And thank you for that moment. Yeah, and also I really, it was seamless viewing for me. In the sense I was totally into it all through. Partly, of course, because it's Hyderabad. We know this so well, the city of such sophistication, of such languages, of such humors. I mean, we have a great city, so that was, of course, at the foundation of it. But the windows that you found very fluid windows into this narrative, and that was very enjoyable for me to hear, to see. I think we can talk more. Like, I think what Mr. Lankala said about the structure and all, we can talk more because I do have some thoughts on that. And, I have some questions for you about some stuff you may have come across in your research, but I can leave that for later, let other people talk, and we can come back to that. Thank you.
Yeah, anyone who wants to come in now? Please unmute yourself so that I know that you want to come in. Yes, Neha, please go ahead.
Hello and good evening, everybody. Good evening, Dr. Yami ma'am. So I'm Neha, final year research scholar, and I'm also working on city, but in writings. So I found the film very interesting, and what I particularly like about it is how you propose that library as commons, and I have personal experience sitting in library in BHU. So what happened there is girls were told to leave the library at 8 p.m. while boys were still sitting there working up to 10 or 12 whenever the library closes. So even the proposition that library or such spaces can act as commons, women have their different ways to negotiate and navigate their equal access to the city and the spaces, right? So that is one thing that I noticed. Another thing is all the projection or portrayal kind of find the static frame there. We cannot, or we did not see frames coming somewhere. The static city is there, the static space is there, but the kinetic city is someone or this city arriving somewhere was kind of absent there. So I felt that. And the land that we talked about. So the very first shot, I was looking at the sunset, and then slowly my gaze came onto the road, the automobiles moving onto the road. So again, how there is a line of direction that the readers, how the audience is receiving the film. So that is one thing. And again, did you position or juxtapose the different narrators while editing the film? Because I think the different interviews took place in different time frame, but how it made together or categorized in different layers or chapters, as Srinivas sir mentioned. So where in the filmmaking process that you categorized or understood or conceived the city from those different layers? Because when I understand city, I was looking from the layers or spaces that make the city and the knowledge together. So I was looking from the part making the whole. So how did you do it while making the film? So that was one question. And the first was how women in contemporary times are negotiating and navigating the equal access to the city or the spaces that we conveniently or maybe very intentionally proposed as commons. So are they commons as such? So thank you.
Yeah, Yamini, maybe you would want to respond to the discussion so far, if there's anything, and specifically to Neha's questions.
First of all, thank you very much for watching the film and discussing it. As you all know, I mean, this is the first time I've done this. I mean, in the sense that I'm also probably learning from the way you see it. I will tell you whatever one is about the process. I think that Nikhila ma'am, do I speak about the process now, or do we do it later? Do I answer questions?
No. Go ahead.
Okay. So, Dr. Lankala was asking me about the process itself. So, I mean, the AAA grant. Firstly, I was going to the Idara for something on some research, media research, basically looking for material on film for my PhD and after PhD as well as some extension of it. However, my relationship with Idara took forefront, and my research itself was sidelined. This was after my PhD, and the project I was working on, while I have collected a lot of material on it, I haven't really progressed beyond that. But the space became a very important part of my life, particularly my relationship with Mohiuddin Qadri Zor. He's in the sense that the film is sort of inspired by my engagement with him, and it was also going back to the story of AA grant. So while I was going to the Idara for collecting some other material, in order to give back to Idara something, basically I was like, how can I, some way give back something to the archive, which is giving me so much. Also specifically to Rafi Saab, because Rafi Saab is the people like Rafi Saab are quite common in Hyderabad, but not so common, at least for me. I haven't really experienced it in other places. Also in Hyderabad, in a particular idiom, like you mentioned, that is, he would actually take it on himself to look for my material, and he would call me every other day saying, "Yamini, आपको मिला कुछ? आपने कुछ बताया नहीं? यहाँ पे जाके देखिए, वहाँ पे जाके देखिए." So he's literally he's become a part of my research itself. So at that time I came across the AA grant, and I proposed to digitize Sabras, which is the magazine of Mohiuddin Zor. And that was the original project that happened. I have digitized the magazine, and I am working on it. However, just to illustrate what are these magazines, I made a 10-minute film, which is the first part of, the personal narrative which this film starts with. That's all there was for this film, which is basically how Sarah and I sitting on a pahad, and then we are asked to leave. There is no space to sit, but Idara sort of welcomes us. So that's all there was to the film, and I showed it in Oral History Association of India conference, and this went on to discussing about knowledge city, because I called it Ilm ka Shehar, and which just translates roughly to city of knowledge. And the discussion went on to talking about knowledge city as such. And when I was, and then I started thinking about, what is this flip of city of knowledge to knowledge city, and what does that mean? And hence also, as happens that as the film looks in structure, it was also how I was engaging with all of this material, essentially looking at the reason there's a lot of focus on books and libraries is because for me it all started with Idara and with Zor's project, about whatever Zor was trying to do, which is to publish, to bring out new voices, and to have a space for it where there could be dialogue. And which is why I sort of followed all those things, while there could be many other glimpses of which come in conversations, like various other kinds of knowledges, various other possibilities, etc. But I sort of fixed my interest on these aspects, which was about Zor's story for me, and hence the focus on looking at libraries and other libraries, and then also book markets, because when Zor was publishing, it was also, yes, Idara was an open library, but he was also sort of interested in the book trade, to make more people read. And so in that sense, that's why the old book markets and all of that. So it was through Zor's story that I I stumbled on this film in that sense. And the structure of the film also, as many of you mentioned, one is I'm not a filmmaker, and I realized that while I was making this, writing comes so much easy to me than making a film. It was really difficult, because I was attempting. Thankfully, as Professor Lankala mentioned, Shrikant was helping me with the camera. He did all the camera. He's an IFLU alumnus. So that was good. That was really helpful. But as far as the edit was concerned, I attempted to find someone who can help me with it, but wasn't much of success. So I was really doing it all myself. So it was more of, how I stumbled on the film is how I made the film, because I would say my own limitations of, I also cannot work. I'm technologically very challenged. To be able to do anything more than this was very difficult. So that was also the reason why this was something I could manage. So that's why the structure as well. In fact, I was at one, I ended up finishing the film because someone, invited me to screen it. Otherwise, I was just sitting on the footage for the longest time. And I was like, I can't do this. But because someone invited me is why I ended up making the film and editing it as the way I stumbled on it. And the reflexive voice which you were mentioning was part of the original 10-minute. And it's also something when I spoke to friends, they were like, it can't be without your personal story. But irrespective of that, it was always a personal story, because this film is because of my relationship with Rafi Saab. So that's the thing about the personal, reflexive voice. And the thing which Neha asked about library as commons, and how women, is it really commons and women navigate? In fact, that's the whole point of this film, that there is no space, and it is that's why for this film and for my own project, Zor is very important, because while generally, in fact, there's one line in the film which I've written it, so I remember it, where I sort of have written saying that where the entire city is saying this is not a place for you, Idara sort of invites you that this is the place for you. So I completely agree with you saying that it's not really, not just women, which is why I attempted to bring in other aspects of other intersections of who are these people who are left out of the so-called idea of commons. It is in fact because this Idara itself was unique in being someone who invited all such people, was why this film in this film I talk about Idara. So yeah, it is not generally the case that library is common in, let's say what Venugopal talks about is the he also says that it is not. If it happens, then library will be revived. That's what he's saying. He's not saying it is commons, but he's in ideal world, or rather this is how it should be, is the mode in which he's talking. The second thing is about the kinetic city being absent. Um, I don't know if it was absent as such, but frankly, I did not really think about the city itself in terms of the static or the kinetic. As I said, this is how I was experiencing the city, and I feel like it's a lot about it is a very kinetic. The city is also very kinetic in the film. Maybe not the what do you say the depends on what we call is kinetic as such, I would say, because all the other aspects which people are talking about in terms of the bookstores or the contemporary moment which Nikhila ma'am was mentioning, the reason that became a part of the film was while when once it is made, people are feeling. People are responding to whatever they see. But my intention of keeping it was that. I didn't want it to be a thing about the past alone. And it's if it is solely about the past, I wouldn't have experienced it. It is, parts of it, you can say parts of it, maybe traces of it, whatever it is. This is something I have experienced, and hence it is not completely a time capsule of that sort. Um, and so I and hence the hence coming back to the contemporary, and and I actually wanted to badly avoid nostalgia, which is why I thought contemporary would be useful for that. But however, I have shown this film also in a couple of places, and so one of the kind of reception has been about nostalgia, and nostalgia among people who have nothing to do with Hyderabad as well. So that's been very interesting. And another aspect which you have mentioned is the connect which people of Hyderabad are feeling for this. That's also something I've seen in other places where I have screened it. They're literally like people who have, I had screened in Hong Kong, and someone was just passing Hong Kong and they came to watch the film because it was about Hyderabad, and there's full on like Hyderabad thing happening there. So somehow it's that. I don't know if it has if the city of Hyderabad itself has that, or if this film has that, but that is happening a lot with the film. Uh, yeah, and the categorization of the interviews as to yes, you're right that they were shot at different times. They were shot at different time periods, different locations, some of them online too. But as I said, for me, the leading story is that of Zor, which is what, at least in 3 to 4 segments, and even in the last segment, I sort of come back to it. The leading story is that of Zor, and everything else I organize to tell you what is it that Zor is operating amidst, be it history or Idara today. What is it that it is operating? What is everything that is around it? So in that sense is how I sort of think of these the structure, because history element particularly came because of that, where I talk about multiplicity of beginnings of be it library or the idea of knowledge, etc., is to understand or is to present that Zor is someone who's who's significant for my interest, but there are also several other things which are inspiring him, which some lineages which is carrying, some lineages which is maybe just cohabiting but not really a part of. That's why the history. I hope I have answered.
Okay. Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah. Gauri, do you want to come in?
No, not really. I just thought that it was a really nice film and discussion, and I just was interested in how the 10-minute film is extended to the 40-minute film, and how that time of watching, when you're watching the 10-minute film, the nostalgia doesn't creep in, but then when you're watching the 40-minute film, I think there's just more time. That's and just from Yamini's uh, um, review of her own film of making process, I think that was just a thought that came to my mind. Thanks, Yamini, thanks, ma'am.
Okay. Yeah. Yes, Sita Reddy, please go ahead.
Hi, Yamini. Thank you for that film. It was, I mean, and I've also been enjoying the discussion. I wanted to ask you a question that I think someone alluded to in the beginning. I think Nikhila, could you talk? Okay, actually, let me start again. I loved the poetic, personal, reflexive part. I get also how the 10-minute kind of like extended into the larger what you're calling nostalgic, but or historical or the commons idea. But I think there was a tension, not tension. There were kind of like two stories when you get to the notion of the library of as commons and space. I think you call it Jaga, like in number 2. It, and I get also that it's personal, but it's also biographical. It's a love story, love letter to Zor, to Idara, in some ways. And that's where I felt the film was tightest. Like when you allowed that, extending the historical aspect of the lens to the library rather than the archive. And so, which is why I wanted to circle back to your own process of how you began with, starting with the archival interpretation, maybe of history, and perhaps immediately when you get to the notion of the public library, it changes in terms of it extends to all of the issues that we were all, talking about. I say this also because I am an academic. I'm also, I'm writing about the city, and I'm actually writing about the city's archives and museums post bifurcation. And I'm trying to do it through the genre of a podcast. And I'm really struggling there with voice, with sympathy, empathy, with outsider, insider, so I just wanted to kind of get your take on those two, if I've kind of isolated them as two strands, and perhaps your own process from moving on a story of the archive or archival understandings of history, and including your artifacts that you're using, to, I guess, a biographical story of this amazing library, right? Which I too love. I don't know. I hope I mean, that's sort of like, I rambled, but
Yeah, so I will please correct me if, in the sense that if I'm not answering your question, or lead me to whatever you want me to discuss more. So one is the biographical story, which is, like I said, it started with my, what do you say, my relationship with Idara, which continues. Like, I mean, the whatever I was searching from Idara is long gone, but I talk to Rafi Saab every week because he calls or I call. So this is sort of an ongoing thing. So that's where this whole film started, and hence, because Zor itself has been very significant for my interest because of Kirti Collective. Whatever little bit we are trying to attempt is to look at Deccan and look at the region. And so Zor is someone who did it very prominently and also in a very inclusive manner, as much as he could imagine at that historical point in time. I would say very inclusive, also multilingual, because he was also imagining a lot more into the future. Like, he wanted a when I say multilingual, more than the languages which I deal with in the film itself. Like he was working with Kannada, he was working with Marathi, he was working with all the scholars who are working in all of these multiple languages. So, and hence the biographical focus. Then where does this move to from the archive itself to a library, which is more public, right? So that is what, as again, I'll go back to Zor itself. So in his magazine, when he's starting a magazine called Sabras, which was the original archival project which I started. In the preface, he writes, so until now, we have been only bothered with connoisseurs of literature, or who are able to understand literature, as a, like, as connoisseurs of literature, or those who can appreciate literature. But it's high time that we talk to everybody, and the value of literature in that is only if it can reach people. It's not only if it's only for, say, the connoisseurs or those who can appreciate, then it's a disservice. And that's why he starts off something called a subras, which is again the name itself, subras. So that's why I also moved to do public libraries, whereas the archives again are something which only, like, let's say, limited, let's say, connoisseurs, for the connoisseurs of whatever, maybe even maybe connoisseurs of history, if you can say. But it's the public library, which I thought is also reflective of what Zor wanted to do. That's why he went into magazine. And the second aspect of it is something which Dr. Lankala also mentioned, which is about all of these people who are reading textbooks, sitting in the public library, right? So that was something which, when I was making it, this is taking off. Do you call this literature or do you not call this literature? If I'm enabling that lens, saying that this is not literature, then I would say that I'm not really, in the sense, I'm again trying to be this connoisseur or someone who says this is it and this is not it. And also, for me, the set of people who are occupying public libraries are way more important than the connoisseurs per se, simply because, again, I was trying to grapple with this idea of knowledge city as well. So it is literally all of these people are attempting to enter knowledge city, right? In the sense that you want to write some exams, and so that your economic situation can get better, your socio-economic status can get better, etc., etc. So it's sort of a, like, they're at the threshold of knowledge city, where we don't know if the knowledge city will allow entry to it or not. But the public space allow you to be, I mean, you might not enter, you might never enter, because there are several people who try, but maybe they never get in. But the public library does not say, okay, you've tried 12 times, get out. No, you can sit there, you can, like we all know, whoever is familiar with Hyderabad, you take your chair, lock it, and sit there forever, so that is something was very useful. I mean, something I really liked, and I wanted to include it in the film as well, because for me it would have been incomplete if I'm only talking about Idara or something which is very important. Not, I mean, like I said, it's a leading thing for me. But without this public library, it's not. It is incomplete. And in fact, Zor's vision was also incomplete because, like in I think the section 3 and section 4, they talk about, with the changing political situations, he could do some things, he could not do a lot of things. So his vision was also incomplete in that sense. But yeah, so that's why the public library. I hope I've answered what you asked.
Yeah.
Yeah. Pramod, please go ahead.
Hi, Yamini. It was a very wonderful movie. I really like camera work also. I have some question, not from a cinema point of view. I come from a very different discipline. Not different, it's a history and sociology. So my question is the posing it as a commons. Because if we look at the historicity of an library, they are located in intense linguistic and communal politics. You have shown Marathi Sangrahalaya, Or if you look at Marathwada part of it, most of the libraries were started by Arya Samaj, like an akhada, you know. So they have a very particular communal kind of an historicity to it. So how do one think of commons in that context where you even the so one question is that the other question is also about Zor. He's a very fascinating person, and he comes up in a context with a Babai Urdu. There is a debate about Urdu and Dakkani. He poses himself as an Dakkani, which doesn't come up anything about that movie because that's a political context where he is also raising that institute to serve something, the debate about Dakkani and Urdu. So I feel little bit of an nostalgic, essentially because it erased that political context of it. That's my comment. Thank you.
Yeah. One is to pose this as a commons, which basically N. Vedugopal was trying to do is again, I think it was more of an idealist posing than a historical analysis. And he was also specifically talking about the Telangana movement, not the Telangana current contemporary, the Telangana peasant movement, and in fact the library movement. Sorry, library movement, which in the later on, which became the Mahasabha and then the movement itself. So he was talking in that context, and the way I thought of it is more of an it thinking of it as an ideal situation. Also going back to the reason I sort of featured it in the film itself is in some way, as I was talking about the public libraries, and this is a very city film as itself says. I mean, I have very limited understanding of what happens outside of the city itself, but the libraries in the city, Bharat Gunwardhan Samstha, as you said, is very seeped into the Marathi politics, etc. But the other libraries which I showed, which is again in Asaf Jahi, I mean patronized by them, etc., etc. But they do to a certain extent contemporary function as commons to a maybe very small extent, but do because as I was saying, several people who just do not even like leave alone access to books, leave alone access to other kinds of things, don't have access to space at also. They sort of end up at the library, and library is one space which just lets you be. So while I completely agree with you as far as that it is seeped in linguistic politics, even communal politics, I think of the idea of commons more as an ideal one, to which on and off, I would say, reflects in some of the libraries in the city, particularly talking about the ones which is the city library and the state central library. Both of them, you do feel that, I mean, it lets people be, and it's also sort of non-restrictive in terms of this, you can do this, you can't do this, all of that. So that way, commons. And in terms of the erasure of the idea of Deccan or him as a Deccan, no, I don't. I mean, while I agree that I didn't pose this thing of Babai Urdu versus him as Babai Deccani, he's called the Babai Deccani. But in fact, I thought the film was entirely about Deccan, and it was in fact like his whole work is about building, bit the bit about Qutub Shah and the bit about Yome Kuli Qutub Shah, which is only a small part which I did include in the film, is all about Deccan. So I don't know if I, at least definitely not consciously, but for me Zor is in fact my interest in Zor is also because of Deccan and not because of anything else. So I was including the Deccan aspect of him through his, because it's all about the city. I mean, it's all about Hyderabad throughout the film. Plus, creating of Yome Kuli Qutub Shah was again about like particularly at the time when being anything Deccani was considered to be hugely an issue, not something you could do. That's what also I think Majid Bedar Saab talks about, saying, and also Rafi Saab says in the film that us time pe they just could not talk about Urdu, or they just could not talk about anything to do with Deccan at all. That's when he sort of not invents, but creates this event of Kuli Qutub Shah's birthday, where you're trying to celebrate the tradition of multiplicity, multilinguality, and coming together of religions, etc., etc. So that is my, let's say, that's how I thought of it as Deccani. Yeah, yes, I did not include the Urdu versus Deccani so much because I don't think I went into that politics only in the film. Yeah, I mean, one could, but whatever, I didn't.
Thank you.
Yeah, Geeta, please go ahead.
Yeah. Yamini, I just wanted to ask you about this whole question. In your previous intervention, you mentioned this progression from the archive to the library. The archive, of course, as we know, is something that is scattered and loose and disorganized. And the movement into the library, then a library is something that, enters the domain of the organized and classified and all of that. So what is the role of the state? Where does state, how important is state patronage in this process of the movement from the archive to the library? Even if you look at the early library movements in India, they were supported by the ruling emperors. In the case of Baroda, for instance, as I mentioned earlier, Maharaja Sayaji Rao was the central figure in the building of public libraries in Baroda, and I'm sure same is the story in Hyderabad as well. And your film very almost seamlessly, constructs this narrative from the library, from books, to the larger question of knowledge itself, and how in contemporary times information technology is goes under the name of knowledge, and that is where it gets the city becomes knowledge city and so on. And we know very well the kind of role that Chandrababu Naidu, for instance, played in making Hyderabad a knowledge city. So what kind of a role does, or how central a role does the state play in not just in terms of building libraries, but also in constructing versions of knowledge and its, subsequent consequences? So if you could talk something about that.
Yes, thank you for that question. Yes, I do think that one is, as you mentioned, the state has always played a very significant central role in, firstly, because libraries are huge infrastructures in terms of space, in terms of, like you said, organization. From an individual archives, like a Zor could do an archive, but he probably couldn't do a library as such. But the state, in fact, even his archive or whatever his work was very much under the patronage of the state. So state played a very important role in that, as you mentioned, even in case of Baroda. And the nature of the state itself has undergone change, and hence its understanding of knowledge as well. Whereas the time you're talking about when Baroda, Shahaji Rao, or in case of Hyderabad, there were libraries being established, there was this interest of presenting themselves as a let's say someone who fosters knowledge, because that's the idiom of patronage, right? That you let best things happen under your guidance as such. But then later on, post-colonial state sort of looks not at the state does not see see its role as someone who fosters knowledge, but someone who controls knowledge is what I would think of. like, because this is also very while I don't get into all of that in this particular, I mean, film, um, but the libraries in Telangana, I'm sure in other states are also, are very are like stepping stones for local politician posts. You know, you first become the library something, and then all of that. With nothing against it, everybody, I mean, politics is perfectly fine, but what happens is that there is really no investment in the space or the idea of knowledge itself. It only becomes this, whereas the space is, and it's the role of state is more on what kind of activities should not be happening in the library, rather than what all can happen in the library, which is what earlier, you know, it used to happen. I mean, the earlier idea was that, which was more of, okay, we want to present ourselves as someone who is more modern, because that was the time and modernity meant all of this. But now the focus is more on control. Uh,
Yeah, I'll come to you, Firdaus. Just a moment. There is a question in the chat box. Uma wants to know, if people want to watch the film, how can they watch it? That is after this discussion. Maybe, Yamini, you can just put
I'll
it.
respond to. I'll respond.
You'll respond. Yeah, Firdaus, please go ahead.
Hi, Yamini. Congratulations on the film. So I have a couple of observations, come questions. I mean, take it as you will. So one of the things I like, as a person who is not necessarily probably a Hyderabadi, but has lived in Hyderabad quite far from in the knowledge city part of Hyderabad in HCU, quite far from structures like Idara and Charminar and that part of the city. One of the things I felt like somebody earlier mentioned that this film is like a love letter to Hyderabad. One thing that really I felt when I watched the movie, that it's primarily in conversation with Hyderabadis, so people who have a long relationship with the city or who have lived and grown up in the city, etc. So it speaks to people who are kind of already familiar with what Hyderabad is, or what in this conversation is being referred to as some kind of a nostalgia or a past. So I'm quite curious and definitely one of the politics in some sense that your film tries to stand by is probably also how question a search, in very subtle ways try to challenge a particular kind of image someone may have about Hyderabad and its history. So it also tries to give more life to what kind of things have been happening in the city and what it stands for, instead of a unidimensional kind of a image that somebody outside may have about Hyderabad. So one thing I was quite curious about is how did non-Hyderabadis who watched your film so far responded to the ilm about the city itself that your movie tries to present. Another thing, I was very curious about the choice of background music that you made. So I feel one of the reasons I felt it had that nostalgic, melancholic quality that one associates with historical monuments and those structures, and that very typical shot of Charminar and the crowd around it, is primarily because of the music. I think if one had a different music, the sense of the same visual would have been very different probably. So I'm quite curious, how did you come to choose the music for the film? One last, very quickly, I watched a documentary after such a long time, so a lot of thoughts. Another thing I felt was like about the Idara itself. I feel like I would love to watch a 3-hour movie just on the Idara and that space. So one thing that I felt, so this structure comes up, there is an exemplary figure called Zor who is responsible for this structure to come up, and then in some sense there's a sweep in time and we know now how people are inhabiting that space. So one of the things I felt was I did not really get a sense of how this place evolved over time, or what it as a living site didn't necessarily kind of speak to me. Like I can see some origin story, and then I can see the present day, that space as a present day site. But in between that, yeah. So I'm sorry if I took too much
No, no.
time.
Thank
No,
Thank
no,
you.
not at all. Not at all. Yeah, Yamini, just one, just to ask if, Dr. Srinivas has anything to respond before you
Yes, yes.
come in, Yamini. And also, I too had this thought about the background music, particularly the Carnatic classical music. It seems so out of place in the end. I
No,
didn't
no, it's
notice
not
it
Carnatic at all.
towards the end.
No,
It
no,
did.
it's not. It's all Sarangi, and
I
the
see.
musician is Japanese. It's
Okay.
it's so he and is also not trained in Carnatic. So
Okay,
anyway,
okay.
I will talk about it.
Okay, yeah, Dr. Srinivas, if you want to respond at this point to the ongoing debate, before we ask Yamini to respond, anything to say?
Yeah. I mean, very quickly, maybe before Yamini responds, maybe just starting with this whole thing about what we've been discussing about nostalgia and whether that plays a role in the film and so on. I mean, for me, I feel that's perfectly a normal way of looking at a city like Hyderabad. There's nothing wrong about being nostalgic. Nostalgia is also a very powerful political tool. It's not simply an indulgence or just a way of storytelling. And with a place like Hyderabad, where the overwhelming sense of the native population is one of loss, that we have lost something we've had and we cannot talk about it. There's no language that we can use. So, it's nostalgia is the only political mode open to us to talk about identity, to talk about something that's outside of communal politics, linguistic politics. Because today, the idiom of politics is primarily religion, language, identity, caste, and so on. There is something else. There is, in a way, it's a different country, a different nation that was lost, and with it, it takes away the language that we used to speak about it also. So today we only have a provincial idiom, and so that way nostalgia, I think, is very powerful to recapture that kind of a language. So I mean, it would have been nice to have even more nostalgia, I felt, like this. Also, a very quick thing when I didn't mention it in the opening remarks, but that whole brief mention of the Yom-e Kuli Kutub Shah that Dr. Zor had organized or thought or invented maybe at that time. It's again it speaks. I mean, it's part of that whole modernizing trend in Hyderabad at that time. There are new things being created because throughout the 20th century, Hyderabad is basically being refashioned from what used to be a feudal, a traditional kind of Mughal outpost kingdom to to being a kind of forerunner in progressive thought, progressive politics, progressive literature, and a kind of futurist outlook to various things. So these kinds of celebrations, a kind of new public being created. So it was very interesting to see that in the film. But it made me think when I was listening to the discussion, especially about Knowledge City and Firdaus just mentioned being living in HCU and so on. So the last time I was there, I think, was for the Hyderabad Literary Festival, which took
Yes,
place in
I heard about this.
yeah, in the actual the Knowledge City that we see briefly in the film, the so-called Knowledge City of
Yes.
Satwa State. And I mean, the attending the festival for what it's worth. I mean, the festival in some ways is also trying to do the kind of work that Dr. Zor had tried to do. Talk about literature, preserve. I mean, that is the impetus theoretically behind these literature festivals that we see mushrooming. But the fact that it took place in something called the Knowledge City, without any sense of irony, I thought was something
Yeah.
that me and many other participants, and there was something very surreal about being in this space and performing literature in a way. So that was kind of strange. But I thought that what Dr. Zor was trying to do with Yom Khuli was something like what the HLF is trying to do today. But that was a more it seemed a more apt and a more public celebration to go through the city and talk about speak literature in some or poetry in that sense throughout the city than to have people gather in this space. So I thought maybe that's a way of rethinking literature and the public, taking literature to the public to organize more of Yom Equally type of processions and festivals. So yeah, these two thoughts I had. Also, people are talking a lot about the who the film speaks to and what the film is. So I was also thinking that the film is about Hyderabad. Then Hyderabad people are kind of a different kind of people in some ways and difficult to talk about. But it's also more than that. It's about book lovers. It's about lovers of literature and words. I think there's also somebody's talking about journalism and how journalism is basically a kind of literature about the present. You're telling stories. So in that sense, it's a film basically, I think, about bibliophiles, about lovers of books and knowledge. So it's much broader in that sense than Sim. So Hyderabad is just like a vehicle, or Idara is a vehicle to talk about this much larger, relationship of books and the city. And so the film I thought is more about that. In that sense, the love of books is also a kind of identity. Because book lovers are also very different people, and it's easy to connect with people who love books regardless of their nationality, origin, or who they are. So I think that's also what the film tries to capture. Yeah, maybe these two things, and then we can continue with Yamini's.
Yeah. Yamini, you want to respond to Firdaus?
Yeah, so I mean, I'm responding to basically the discussion. One is about the film. Is it made for Hyderabadis, or it is sort of talking to Hyderabadis? When I was making it, particularly when I was editing, I was very conscious as to who am I making the film for, and for me, it was important to make it for Hyderabadis. So that way, yes, it was also. I mean, and even when I was giving, at least attempting to give some context for those who don't know the city, or those who are not so familiar with the city, which is why this was something which people pointed out in the discussion in Hong Kong as well, that which is why you have the map. Basically, this is where Hyderabad is, sort of a thing. So I was trying to do that a little bit. But if you ask me choose an audience, I was choosing out and out for people from Hyderabad. So that, yes, you are right in that sense that. But what's happened? How, as you asked, how are people reacting to it? Um, I've actually had very interesting, responses wherever I have shown. One is that people who've never been to Hyderabad are feeling nostalgic about the city, and there people who have probably, like, there was someone who just had been in Hyderabad for one day, and they said it makes them want to work on the city or things like that. So that's what is happening. So as Professor Lankala was mentioning, the other constituency of the film, which is the bibliophiles, are getting interested in the city, because the film sort of presents it as like a space for bibliophiles, or that's how they see it. That's why bibliophiles are now interested in Hyderabad. So that's been the response of those who don't know the city. The second is the choice of the music itself. It was not so much of a choice. So as I was telling you, I was doing the edit myself. And one thing why it didn't become a 3-hour film on Nidara, which I could happily make, was I'm also teaching, right? When I see how my students react to film, they just switch off in 10 minutes. So I am just also cognizant of that audience. And I'm always constantly asking that question to myself as to, is it becoming a long, my own trip on Idara, literally? And I mean, is anyone else at all, just, I mean, is it communicating to anyone else at all? So looking at I mean, I 19-year-olds and how they react to like films as such, that's also some reason why it became I mean, in the sense it took the form it had. And when I was editing, a lot of it was about what I could gather rather than what is best for the film in that sense. Because as I said, I was editing it myself, couldn't find help. So there's lots of very abrupt sound changes which are there still in the film, but I don't know how to work on them. So that's still like that. So as far as the music is also concerned, I had asked someone who's a musician to do an interlude. Maybe she could sing or something, just because I again wanted some break or some moment, some pauses where people could, because this is a lot of talking heads sort of a film and lots of ideas are being thrown around. I wanted some interludes where people could think through things. That was my idea. And initially, the interludes were silent. And I was just exploring as to can I do something else also. And I asked a musician if they could sing, and then they looked at like some earlier edit of the film, and they said, I have a friend who plays sarangi. They could play something for you and see if it works for you. And I mean, it was again by chance that I found a sarangi player who's a Japanese man living in India for 16 years and plays sarangi. So they sent me some 6, 7 pieces of music, and all of them were so good. I don't know if it fits with the fits with the film or not. As I said, I was more working with what was available to me than what was like best for the film, because I don't have that, let's say, I don't really have that network to bring all of those things together. And among the all the sarangi pieces which he played, I sort of liked the one which I picked also because it to me was not so I mean, sarangi has a certain kind of tone to it. This was I mean, I thought it fit with the kind of visuals I had. And I agree that it kind of gives a nostalgic feel which I was avoiding, but nonetheless I like the music also. So I mean, it is what it is. But I mean, not to deny what other people are experiencing or feeling, but for me it's not nostalgia at all, in the sense nothing about the film is nostalgia for me at all, because I would say nostalgia is something, is that long, like textbook definition of longing for something which is not there. But all of these people who are present in this film are sort of experiencing whatever they're talking about, be it about, I mean, the space they inhabit, or even the libraries they are, the contemporary bits which they are. They're all in that space and they are sort of experiencing it. So it is not nostalgia. I mean, I do agree that it might give a feeling of that to the viewer, but as a maker, when I'm making, I'm not thinking of nostalgia at all. But I was cognizant that this is a kind of dominant, um, you know, emotion that people would deal with. Also someone pointed out when I screened it in Pune, was that, see, now they said that now anything printed book is nostalgia. So that's what they said. So maybe that's also the thing. Then you're talking about books in physical, as physical books, that automatically becomes nostalgia, is what they were saying. But yeah, nonetheless, that's what, for me, it is not nostalgia at all.
Yeah, let's take a few responses and then we'll come back to you, Yamini. Anyone who wants to come in now? Sridhar, Tarakeshwar. Yeah, please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Yamini, for the film, and thank you, Lankala, for some of the issues that you have raised, and also others. This issue of nostalgia, well, I was also being nostalgic while watching the movie, especially as Jai Srinivasrao says in the Facebook response about the Sunday market. But yes, and also about the books in general, as Emily was saying, the non-Hyderabadis do respond to it in terms of that. Because there's a lot of that, not only in the music, not only in the editing, but also in the people who are talking about it in the film. So it is not the filmmakers, not nostalgia, or the film's not a nostalgia. The actors themselves are nostalgic about it. So you can't avoid it unless you want to completely suppress it. And as Srinivas was saying, nostalgia is also political in that sense. What we choose to remember. and what we choose to forget. In that sense, we are intervening in the present. So yes, there are uneasy relations in the past, whether it could be of right-wing politics taking into publication and library, and many of these language associations were slightly right-wing during that period, including Kannada libraries and associations in Hyderabad, not only just Marathi. In that sense, yes, it is political and we need to forget about it. And many of the voices are the quote unquote, the historians or the experts who are speaking in the film. It is not that they are not aware of it, but they choose not to say it now. One, because maybe their understanding of the purpose of the film, one, and then the context in which they are saying it. So not to rake up the wounds of the past is something that we make a conscious choice in that sense. So here, I think some of us are expecting it to be a kind of argument about the past, not simply a kind of documentation. Or even if it is a documentation, we might find fault that that is not included, this is not included. Even I thought that when you were saying, Yamini, that these students who are preparing for the competitive exams, sitting in the public library and outside in the lawn, on the chairs, I also thought about the regular market that is there in the Koti, which sells regular books about competitive exams and your graduate studies books. That was quite huge. I think some of them on Sundays become Sunday market sellers, catering to the other books. So it is not that they will not be doing anything in entire week and only come in the Sunday. So they act as the dual sellers for both. So I was looking at that. That is absent here. And also the question about the state that Geeta raised was quite interesting, I thought. Because I thought this film is also a kind of sequel to Kavita Datla's work, because it looks like a kind of a book history in Hyderabad. So in that sense, the university and then the publication wing of the university, the translation center in the Osmani University, that plays a huge role. And also the several other institutions by the state itself, except for the Bilgrami and then is support to the library and other things. The role of the state is not there in the much. These are all only when we expect it to be completely a documentary of the past. But you have to work with the material that you have, and then you need to impose a kind of structure on it. But it is also quite interesting what you choose to include and what you choose to edit out. But somehow, even in that nostalgia, there is some pain, angst, not only about the past, but about the police action that seeps through. I think you consciously might have retained it because you are also thinking about this film not as simply a documentation, but also as a kind of intervention in the present. So you might have thought that that is important to retain it. So in that sense, the ideological conditions of a production of a text, here this filmic text, are multiple. And it will also have polyphonic structure to it, because it's a documentary and different characters speak it, and it is not structured, though there is an editing which is trying to impose some kind of order on it, but in spite of that there will be polyphony in the text. So in that sense, I thought it was quite interesting. Thanks to you and all those who participated in the discussion. It was an enriching experience.
Okay. We'll take a few more responses and then come back to you, Yamini. Anyone else who wants to respond to the film? Madhurima?
Yeah, I don't really have anything to add to the discussion because many of the points have been discussed and many of the points I have not really thought about, but I really liked watching the film and I watched it for almost 2 times. It was really interesting to watch the film and the way you have uh, kind of made it, and I mean divided into different chapters, and the way you have thought about knowledge and the different aspects of knowledge. And there is also comments on how during the making of the film the idea of knowledge has changed. It was really interesting. I look forward to the discussion more. Thank you.
Okay. Any other comments? Sridhar says, Sunday markets is nostalgic. It may be the story of many cities. Yeah, that is true. I also had pasted Jai Srinivas' response. If you haven't seen it, he says Dr. Srinivas Lankala has captured all the aspects as well as the nuances of the film, things that we might miss, both in terms of form and content, the broad brush strokes about knowledge and literature, the place of knowledge and Hyderabad's place in it, the abstract concept and the concrete manifestations of small things like A.A. Hussain being acknowledged children's books, the visual poetry part of it, my favorite Abbott Sunday Market, excellent, makes me want to watch the film again. Yeah, so this is another response to the film. Anyone else? Yes, Uma, please go ahead.
Hi again. So I had a question actually. So this Lughatan Nissa, the book, where is it now?
With him. It's his
With
personal.
him.
Yes,
Okay, okay. And was there more information about it? How did you think through that and include what you did and leave out what you did?
Yeah, I will respond to that. Yes.
And I have one more difficult question, and that is,
Yes.
so I also have done some research on Hyderabad, and so our mentor was a wonderful man called Ziauddin Shakir, and he told us this battle between Zor and Sherwani, who was the history prophet
Yes.
of Mania, over Bhagmati. So I was wondering what you gathered.
Yes,
And
I'm very
I
familiar
would
with
love
this.
to talk about that and hear your input. Yeah, thank you very much.
Yes.
Yeah, if there are no more immediate responses, then maybe Yamini can come in now.
Okay.
Yeah, and respond to all that has happened in the meanwhile.
Okay, thank you. Firstly, Professor Tharakeshwar, thank you very much for what you said, because in fact, when I was making the film, I was also thinking about this, because I mean, my first instinct is as a researcher. So what do you include, what do you not include? But I consciously kept that aside, saying that if I start literally including all the references, then it's just going to be like a long bibliography of book history in Hyderabad. It will not work as a film. So very consciously, as you said, there are lots of omissions, and those are, I mean, some of them conscious, some of them because I was like, I don't want to do a thorough, like literally covering everything on books that happens in the city. That was not the intent at all, because I'm not trying to tell like a all-encompassing history of the city at all. Most importantly, what has gone through for me, the tying thread to this was my experience at Izara and Zor, which for me was important. So Zor, whatever becomes important for Zor becomes important for the film, and also I mean, inevitably was connected to me, because I mean, I was going through Zor's stuff and all of that. So the Sunday market sellers who who have other businesses, all of that. I mean, I have the footage for all of that, but then if I start attempting to make it, let's say, historically accurate description of how, let's say, this idea of all the books or knowledge works in Hyderabad, it would be a humongous effort. I mean, in the sense that it's literally like it's an extended bibliography, which I didn't want to do. So it's very consciously, intentionally, I have left out a lot of things, and I've just let whatever aspects which I spoke to me in terms of this narrative lead this. So that's how you, as you very rightly and beautifully summed it up. So I'm very aware that there are so many things which I have omitted, but I'm not trying to include them also, because I'm not really writing a book on a book. Probably I mean, one can say that, you know, these things are missing, these things are not missing, etc., etc. But this is a very and also that's also I mean, the reflexive voice, was hoping that 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 is an indicator of how this is a very subjective story which I'm telling, and I'm not making it I'm not trying to make it any, like, you know, list of things at all. So that and in terms of the inclusion and exclusion of the things which people spoke about, Lugatul Nisa, for example. So one is I had a prefixed restriction of length of the film, simply because it's a talking heads film. And already in 40 minutes, people speak a lot. There are lots of ideas happening. So 40 minutes was something I began with even before I started anything to edit. So with that in mind, there are lots of things which I wanted to include and which did not include, which were there in the earlier edit and did not come in the later edit, because I did not want to go beyond 40 minutes as such. And about Lugatun itself, so there are when I was speaking to several of these people, they all spoke about their something which they were very proud of, you know, in their own collections. N. Venugopal also had a very long, I mean, longish piece about how he went about collecting something which he's very proud of. It's a very nice story, but did not feature simply because of the length, also because of to incorporate the multiplicity of voices, because it just would feel like you're listening to him for the longest time if I included that bit. And I chose to include Lugatun Nisa because Lugatun Nisa was small enough that it would capture what I'm trying to say without it seeming like you're listening to Majid Bedar Saab forever. That's why it went in, and he was talking about it as to you know in fact, he had a huge library which very recently he's donated a lot of it. And so this is something he was saying, how this is about women's language dictionary, as you see, and all of that. Yeah, and about the other the question is about Bhagmati Sherwani, as well as it's a thing which plays out in contemporary discussions. I'm sure you're familiar with. So what Zor was very in that sense very consciously inclusive. So Zor contends, and he does this in multiple essays. He says that Bhagmati as a figure existed, and this he proudly talks about it, saying that this is about multiplicity, this is about mixing of religions, this is about exchange and all of that. Whereas Sherwani says they did not exist, Bhagmati, at all. So Zor is very I mean, he presents his evidence saying why he thinks Bhagmati exists, etc., etc. This plays out even to the contemporary, so much so that there are people who would say that, you know, you cannot talk of Zor as a historian because he's writing fiction, right? He's writing fiction and he's not really a historian in terms of, you know, as a method and all of that. Whereas Sherwani, maybe because of his position, etc., maybe would be called as a historian, and hence you cannot talk about what Zor has written. But when Zor is writing whatever he's writing, he's also like using it to say something about, like, because to promote his idea of Deccan, which is about inclusivity, which is about exchange, which is about multiplicity, etc., etc. So irrespective of whether Bagmati existed or doesn't exist, this is his use of Bhagmati for him, and this is why it is important for him to write about. In fact, Zor and Sherwani's the so-called rivalry or quibble extends beyond, because Sherwani, while he was not from Hyderabad, he has, I mean, Manu has a department on him, but Zor hasn't got any recognition. So there are people, I mean, like someone who heard of this film came came to me and was saying that Zor was supposed to get so much more recognition, because he literally single-handedly built up the Deccan. I mean, in terms of history, in terms of, let's say, the narratives, all of that. So he should have been recognized more, but he hasn't been. So this is also something which is an ongoing discussions in Urdu sphere as such. So yeah, so I hope that I have at least said something about what you asked.
Okay. Yeah, any other responses before we close the discussion? Okay, if there are no more responses, then thank you very much, first of all, Dr. Srinivas, for agreeing to initiate a discussion on this film. And thank you, Yamini. It's a 40-minute film, but we have gone on for close to 2 hours. And Geeta and I, after in our post-mortem, after every discussion, we say it's a successful discussion once we cross 10:30. So in that sense, this has been a wonderful, wonderful discussion. I think your film has provoked so much thinking and so much interest in so many of us on a variety of issues. So thank you, Yamini, for making available the film and for joining the discussion today. Thank you, all of you who joined the discussion today. Remember that we meet every Saturday on Talking Films online for film discussions at 9 p.m. If you want to be a part of these discussions, just get in touch with Geeta or me on Facebook. TFO is a private group on Facebook. We are also on WhatsApp. That's where we share the film related information. So please reach out to us and do join the forthcoming discussions. Thank you all very much, and
thank you very much for inviting me, and also Professor Lankala for your time. Thanks a lot for the discussion as well.
Thank you, Yamini. Thank you very much. Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Thank you, Lankala. Thank you, Yamini. Thank you, everyone. See you next week. Good night.
Good night.